Hello, everyone, and I would just like to specify some things that I didn't mention in the previous video. And we actually talked about all of the harmful effects that elevated insulin levels can do for cognitive performance. But the question is exactly what level of insulin is particularly harmful. And so the goal is to actually keep the levels quite low. And ideally, you want to maintain it below 4.5 micro international units per milliliter. So there's not so many tests right now that can test the level of insulin, but you want to maintain it less than 4.5. And you also want to keep your hemoglobin A1C levels less than 5.6, and you also want to maintain your fasting glucose level between 70 to 90 milligram per deciliter. So less than 70 is ideal, and especially less than 90. And that's because, again, high levels of glucose can cause glycation end products, and which stands for age, and they can bind to hemoglobin and they can cause protein alterations. They can actually damage blood vessels in the body, and so that's why you want to keep them low. And they also bind to rage receptors and cause inflammation that way. And then they can also cause free radicals that can that also can cause damage in the body by binding to DNA and other molecules. So ideally, you want to keep it um, at less than 70 if possible. And I'm talking about the fasting levels. And I talked last time about vitamin Bs, and vitamin Bs are important to keep homocysteine level low. Homocysteine, just like high glucose, can also damage blood vessels and your brain as well. And so that's why you want to keep the vitamin B's high, because vitamin B's methylate homocysteine and reverse it. So you kind of get rid of it via that reverse reaction. And the levels are, you want to have vitamin B12 somewhere between 500 and 1500 pg per milliliters. And I put this in the comments of the previous lesson. You want your folate to be between 10 and 25 nanograms per milliliters, and you want your vitamin B6 to be between 60 and 100 micrograms per liter. These are the numbers, but the point is the key insight here is to take a vitamin B complex like I do with the active forms of the B vitamins, and you should be fine. And then avoid eating a lot of refined carbs, because those are the ones that really tend to spike up your insulin levels. My favorite carbs are actually tubers, and they're actually resistant starches that don't raise your insulin levels as much, um, because they pass along, right? And they get and your your gut bacteria loves them. So you want to focus on resistant starches like tubers, like jicama, like taro root, like parsnip, right? Like rutabaga. All of those are really, really good. Even sweet potatoes and yams. That's right. And those are much better. And even there's a fruit, green bananas. Green bananas are also good in resistant starches. So all of these guys are very good. They don't raise your insulin levels as much. But yeah, just take a vitamin B complex and really focus on reducing refined carbs, because those are the ones that really raise your levels. And maybe if you're in your 40s and above, it's always good to check your glucose levels and keeping that above 70 milligrams per deciliter. I will leave it in the show notes. And especially the insulin levels, keeping it below 4.5 micro international units per milliliters. In fact, insulin can maybe even more important than your glucose, right? And so, because sometimes your glucose levels are fine, but your insulin level is really high, and we know the problems that insulin resistance can cause. We talked about them, such as increasing your levels of beta amyloid, and so it's definitely important to keep its levels low. And if insulin is high, you get insulin resistance eventually, and then your brain is not going to be able to use insulin as a tropic factor, and that can contribute to Alzheimer's and older age and neurodegenerative diseases. So you want to keep glucose low, but you also want to keep insulin low. And research has shown that insulin tends to rise even before glucose does. So you really want to get both. Now, there aren't many tests right now to check your insulin levels freely at home. There is a ways to check your glucose via continuous glucose monitoring. So that's definitely a good first step. But as a general lifestyle that everyone can do today is First of all, to reduce the consumption of refined carbs and just simple sugars, and then also um, from the previous videos, to improve brain function even more, you want to keep homocysteine levels low, which that damage blood vessels in the brain, can cause inflammation in the brain, can cause the atropic form of Alzheimer's. And the way to keep it low is by increasing the uptake of vitamin B's in their active forms. And so I recommend taking a complex. I showed you the one I'm taking. I think it's by AOR, but there's different brands. And then, of course, the other thing that can also cause damage to blood vessels as well as increase the risk of Alzheimer's is high insulin levels. So reducing the consumption of refined carbs. So these are the two simple lifestyle hacks that I would recommend to anyone to start from today. Taking some form of vitamin B complex for your energy, for nervous system function, to really improve your brain function and to reduce the risk for neurodegenerative disease down the line by keeping homocysteine low. And then the second thing I'd recommend for good brain function, which I think is so important, is reducing refined carbs to keep insulin in check. Another good thing is after eating, you can go for a small walk to reduce that insulin spike that you get after eating a meal.